Welcome, everyone. I'm Peter Alleggi, professor of history at Michigan State University in the US and a founding member of Sports Africa Network. Today, it's a great pleasure to be here with you all to discuss the book Tennis, Apartheid, and Social Justice, the first non-racial international tennis tour in 1971 by Professor Salim Badat, who joins us live from Bloemfontein, South Africa. This is an important scholarly history on Black tennis in South Africa. And I think what makes it so important is that it places non-racial tennis players, those who opposed apartheid, as well as the organizers, center stage, in a country that to this day does not adequately account for its divided, fractured, often painful sporting history. So even though I have been studying South African sport history for nearly 3 decades, I'd never heard of the 1971 tennis tour covered in such exquisite detail in the book. So thank you, Salim, for making me smarter and for highlighting so powerfully how the process of recording and then publishing, disseminating an accurate and representative history has social justice implications for sports today and tomorrow. So we are privileged to have with us Salim Badat, the author of the book, and we should be soon joined by Mr. Hussein Bobat, who is one of the protagonists of the book. So a few words to introduce Professor Salim Badat. He is a research professor in the history department at the University of the Free State in South Africa. In 2006, Professor Badat was appointed the first Black vice chancellor of the university, currently known as Rhodes, in the history of South Africa. Mr. Hussein Bobat is a tennis player, still today. I think he's on the courts in Durban as we speak, or just getting off the court, and a leading financial advisor from the province of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. His provincial and national sporting achievements include titles at various youth levels, and he won a dozen of those in his glory days. He was also the Natal Open men's singles champion and Natal Challenge Series singles champion 4 times, and of course was on that now famous 1971 tour to Europe. So Salim and Hussein, thank you for making time for us on Saturday evening to discuss your book. Over to you, Salim.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for all the participants taking part here. So I look forward to this engagement. I hope it'll be an engagement rather than a monologue or so. And thanks to all of you for putting this thing together. I really appreciate it.
And thank you. And for those of you who may not have had a chance to read the entire book, this is a good time to turn it over to our star tennis player and expert anthropologist, Tarminder. Dr. Tarminder Kaur is a political anthropologist and a research associate at the University of Johannesburg. Over to you, Tarminder.
Well, thank you, Peter, and thank you, Salim, for being here. I really hope Hussein is joining us shortly and not miss my very quick overview of the book. So I wrote this review. I wrote the review of the book, and it should be published soon by the South African Historical Journal. So it will be available. I'm only reading an extract from the review. So just for those who haven't actually had a chance to read the book, you get the big picture of what's happening in the book, and then I'll set up. Then I'll ask both Salim and Hussein to read particular sections from the book so that we can also get into some nitty-gritties of what this rich book has in store for us. I mean, it's really an attempt to whet your appetite to really want to read the book if you haven't already read it. If you have, you know the story quite well. So, as the book is, as we heard earlier, the book is anchored on an international tennis tour sponsored by the non-racial Southern African Lawn Tennis Association. And I'm just going to call it now non-racial tennis body and not use the abbreviations. They can sometimes become mouthful. So the tour took place in 1971. So I'm taking you back to 1971. A 6-player squad was formed to send the best male players of non-racial tennis body to play international tennis tournaments in Europe, in England and in Europe. Named after the captain, the Dhiraj squad included Jasmat Dhiraj Soma, at the time 30 years old, Hiralal Dhiraj Soma, 25 years old, Elvin Solomon, 21 years old, Oscar Woodman, 20 years old, Hussein Bobat, 18 years old, Kevin Bergman, 19 years old. So that's the squad. The primary goal of the tour was to allow the male Black tennis players an opportunity to train and compete among the best in the sport at the time in the world. As a tennis player myself, once aspiring to turn professional, I know the significance of this kind of exposure in a tennis player's life. So the intended exposure they gained through this tour, but they also learned the harsher lessons about the span of influence that apartheid sports wielded on the governing structures of international tennis. But that recounts experiences and tennis biographies of all 6 players in the book, as well as the tournaments they played, how they performed, and how they got along across the various divides. And so it's not a simple sort of a straightforward narrative, and that's where the complexities and of how apartheid sports policies were changing and intervening in very personal lives of people. So structured in 2 parts, the book connects the structural and ideological with interpersonal. The first part contextualizes the history and politics of the 1971 tennis tour, while the second part presents the tennis lives of the Dhiraj squad's 6 players. The introductory chapter frames the content and research conducted towards the project, clarifying the social justice imperative of such an undertaking in the present day. So it's not just recounting the past. There is a clear agenda behind the book and what social justice means today. Chapter 1 plants in the imagination of the readers the global cultural events, the sounds, and the accents of 1971. Chapters 2 to 4 situate the 1971 tennis tour in the broader scholarship on the history of sports in Africa and the multinational governing structures of tennis in South Africa at the time. Further, the concept of social justice is theorized, arguing for the stakes of recording, writing, reading, and rediscovering the ordinary in the stories of men who challenged apartheid with their tennis rackets. So for those amongst our participants who are in the process of defining their research projects, this is the section which is really rich with information to think with. Chapters 5 to 10 develop the details surrounding the 1971 tennis tour, presenting the personal experiences and the costs to the players of standing up for principles of non-racialism, and also shedding light on where such efforts fall short. So Professor Badat do not shy away from actually putting a critical eye on the players or the squad administrators who are actually taking some bold stances, but they also had their own, the tour, the framing of the tour itself had their shortcomings. For example, there were no women involved or sponsored to accompany in the tour. As Badat eloquently puts it, the frontiers of the Black South African players were modest. They were to compete freely against tennis players irrespective of race, ethnicity, and nationality, improve their tennis, and be ambassadors of non-racial sport upholding equality and human dignity in opposition to the pervasive racism and patriarchy in sport under colonialism and apartheid. So to this end, the book is not simply about putting to record the stories of 6 Black tennis players who toured Europe in 1971. Instead, Bodat is arguing for paying attention to the indignities of the past to craft a strategy to struggle for social justice in the present, an argument further advanced in the concluding chapter. The social justice lens then serves to expose the misgivings of structures that may seem banal and technical, but are too often manipulated to various ideological ends. The individual tennis biographies in part 2 are not simply celebration of individual struggles and achievements. These 7 short chapters dwell on the relatable ordinariness of tennis players' lives, while emphasizing that sport do not automatically provide a level playing field for competitors to test their prowess. It was not their innate sporting talent, but for the tone of their skin that so many were excluded from competing at sports of their choosing. In sum, the otherwise ordinary lives of the 6 Black tennis players of apartheid South Africa add the necessary layers to appreciate the extraordinariness of the 1971 tennis tour. So in this book, one incident stands out. During the tour, Hussein Bobat receives an international invitation to compete at the Junior Wimbledon Boys Under 18 event. Anybody who follows tennis know what a big deal that was. A week before the start of the Grand Slam tournament, Bobat is informed at a meeting that he is withdrawn from the competition because of an objection filed by the white tennis governing body at the time. So to this end, Salim elaborates on how international collusion was an intentional and essential ingredient in upholding of apartheid sports system. The governing body of tennis that exclusively served white South Africans filed an objection to Bobat's entry, arguing that he was not number 1 junior in South Africa. How could he? The processes and politics of Bobat's or any Black tennis player's exclusion from representing South Africa in the sport is more convoluted than any single version of apartheid's sports policy can truly explain. So this is where I want to ask Salim to reflect on that section on international conclusion and read a few passages from his book. I think when you summarize the book, it just loses that nitty-gritties of every day. So I selected a small section for Salim to read from his book, and then I selected another section which I would really like Hussein to read from the book, and then then it's back to Peter. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Terminda. So this, as Terminda has said, is an extract that she's chosen. So let me begin. Despite regular submissions by non-racial sports organizations to international sports associations to act against racist sports bodies in South Africa, these efforts found unsympathetic ears and initially bore no fruit. For example, the International Lawn Tennis Federation rejected proposals since 1965 for the exclusion of the all-white South African Lawn Tennis Union. One impediment was the ILTF's weighted voting system. 2 European countries, Britain and France, had more votes than the whole of Africa put together. The ILTF ignored applications for membership from the non-racial tennis body. Despite its constitution containing a clause against racism, which was patently flouted by the white body in South Africa, no action was taken against SALTU for a long time. Peter Alegi points out that white South Africa was significantly assisted in world tennis by the fact that it was one of the founding members of the International Federation, playing its first Davis Cup in 1913. This strengthened the hand of elitist white European and American men in charge of international tennis, most of whom were unsympathetic to apartheid's critics. Something that continues as far as apartheid is concerned in another part of the world. Moreover, tennis was not an Olympic sport from 1928 to 1988, which bought the ILTF some time and space to deflect growing pressure to exclude white South Africa from its ranks. In 1969, the English secretary of the ILTF, Basil Ray, visited South Africa. It was reported that in an astonishing meeting here this week, Mr. Ray tried to persuade the non-racial tennis body to affiliate to the country's exclusively white tennis union. Ray proposed that the non-racial body should accept affiliation similar to the provincial tennis bodies and would have thus 4 delegates out of a possible 48 delegates to the white body. He conceded that the offer was not attractive and not in accordance with international tennis laws, but suggested it was the best in the circumstances. The response that he got was the same that he had been getting for years from the non-racial body. A firm no. Emin Patna, a stalwart non-racial official, retorted that the offer is simply not acceptable. It's not administration we're after. We want to play. Another official recalls at the end of the fact-finding visit, Basil Ray traveled to Durban to meet himself and Emin Patna. He came with return air tickets. Imagine the arrogance. He came with the return air tickets for us to go to Johannesburg to sign a unity agreement on the humiliating terms proposed by him and the white body. Mr. Osman says, we listened to Mr. Ray for 10 minutes and then we showed him the door. The non-racial body rightly refused to accept any subordinate status and affiliate to the white body. At its meeting in January 1970, it again rejected any form of subservient affiliation to the white body. Pata, the official, reiterated the position. We accept nothing that makes us subservient to another body. We are a non-racial body and believe that merit only should count. I hope to pick up this issue of merit later and the downsides of this merit argument. Not only did Basil Ray, the international secretary's proposal, not address racial segregation in tennis, it also displayed an all too familiar and offensive colonial mentality. The white body would remain the parent body, which the other bodies would affiliate and maintain a subordinate relationship. A brochure of the White Union exemplified its desperation and deviousness at that time. It displayed numerous pictures showing mixed sport in South Africa. No doubt all of the photographs taken at the occasional multinational tournaments mounted for international appeasement. Brazenly and without permission, the white-only tennis body recorded the non-racial body as the co-publisher of his brochure, malfeasance that the non-racial body exposed and for which it demanded and received an apology. However, the white body's ploy worked. Its publication did impress many West Europeans, and South Africa managed to escape expulsion from the international tennis. In April 1971, Prime Minister Vorster made the bizarre proposal that the time had come for blacks to form their own international sporting ties, and that the white minority government would provide all possible encouragement. This proposal only made sense in the context, of course, of the apartheid regime's pursuit of the policy of multinationalism in sport and its separate development and Bantustan policies. Since each country could affiliate to an international sports body only through a single national body, Vorster was virtually asking the world bodies to amend their constitution to suit South African sports policies founded on racism. Even more ludicrous were the statements of the apartheid Minister of Sport. He stated that he could see no difficulty in black South African bodies inviting overseas white teams to the country. However, competitions with international white teams had to be played in black areas and had to be for black audiences only. Waring conceded that he could not see any team coming to South Africa to play black teams, as the project would be a financial flop, since the black bodies did not possess the facilities to hold such competitions. As one non-racial official wryly observed, Waring's proposition was akin to presenting a loaf of bread to a patient who's being fed intravenously. To acquire international legitimacy, white sports bodies promoted multinational and multiracial sport under their direction, as distinct from non-racial sport, and instituted superficial development programs along racial and ethnic lines aimed at cultivating certain black sportspersons.
Well, thank you, Salim. It brings out a lot of layers of how the processes of exclusion and inclusion work, and they have a lot of implications for how we think about sports in South Africa today.
And I should just say, Terminda, say that given the events that are unfolding in front of our eyes right now in Israel-Palestine, that's what infuriates you, because this is similar to what I'm writing about. It's as if we have not moved since 1948 in South Africa and 1994 in South Africa. It is exactly the same thing being played out right now as we speak in Israel and Palestine.
Well, thank you, Salim. That it does add that added weight to understand how we make sense of the world today. May I ask, welcome Hussein Bobat to the meeting and let him kind of a short introduction. And I obviously asked you to read your section. You can, or shorten it as you please. Really, Hussein, this is your time now. Hussein, you might have to unmute yourself.
We may have lost the connection to Hussein.
Yeah, well, Peter, do you want to pick it up from here? And then when Hussein comes back, we can ask him to read the section. I mean, it's really in his own words. It's published. The section I'm asking is obviously published in the book, but it is Hussein's section in his own words.
Let's see if we have an audio connection now. Hussein, can you hear us okay? Because I do have a couple of questions that Hussein is perfectly positioned to try and respond to. So we could use that as a bridge. Up to you, Linda.
Let's do that. Let's do that, I think.
So let me just ask a couple of questions to begin, and then we can open up the floor. The first one, I guess, could be addressed at either Professor Badat or Mr. Bobat, and that is the striking photograph of Jazmat Diraj with Arthur Ashe on page 152 of the book. Couple of things are striking there. The first is that they're in civilian clothes. It has an air of informality that speaks to Professor Badat's ability to get at those hard to get to sources, those personal archives that people often collect, construct, maintain, and really give meaning to their past, and that historians often don't consider, overlook, and just, you know, they're too focused often on institutional archives to get to those. And I think it's a wonderful representation of what you can do when you care so much about the stories and the people you're telling, that you're becoming less of the sort of leader in the research and letting the subject, in a sense, direct the narrative. But it's also striking because of something more related to tennis, and that is that the open era, where amateurs and professionals played together at the majors, had only started 3 years earlier, right? 1968. And Ash was one of the very, very few Black tennis players or tennis players.
Oh, there's it, unmute, okay.
There we are. And so my question is, you know, to Mr. Babat, what was your view of Ash, both as a tennis player of incredible standing already and soon to be even more accomplished, but also your view of kind of Ash's moderate politics, because he was denied visas to enter South Africa, what, in 1969 and 1970, if I'm not mistaken, to play in the South African Open. But then after your tour, after South Africa's expulsion from the IOC, suddenly Ash applies for a visa, and he is given the visa in 1973. And there was, not everybody was happy, including Dennis Brutus, Chris de Broglio, and others from Sandrock, whom you met during your time in London. So what was your view of Ash as a player and his moderate politics in this explosive context? And maybe just give us a sense of your experience as one of the few tennis players who wasn't white in this changing world of elite tennis in Europe. Thank you.
Hi, Peter, thanks. So Arthur Ashe, you know, in the mid and latter 60s, when pressure from abroad started mounting on South Africa, it was individuals like Arthur Ashe, and then organizations like Sandrock, with especially Dennis Brutus and Chris de Broglio, were in the forefront of trying to get South Africa expelled from the Davis Cup and international tennis. And really at that time, Ashe, with his applications to come to South Africa for visa, was a thorn in the flesh of the white racist South African body at that time. And Ashe, together with the Sandrock at that time, we thought was instrumental in having got South Africa expelled. However, what happened was, shortly after that, Ashe then joined the professional body. And having joined the professional body, leaving the amateurs, he sort of lost interest in fighting for non-racial sport in South Africa. And he then applied for a visa to come to South Africa and was granted that, and he did come. For us, non-racial Black players in South Africa, that was a blow, because even though Ashe felt that by him coming here, more could be done, but all our administrators, we all agreed that the moment he set foot in South Africa, it was a victory for the all-white South African Union at that time. So yes, initially Ashe was very much instrumental in getting South Africa kicked out. In fact, there's lots of communication and information available at that time where the International Lawn Tennis Federation used very derogatory terms regarding Arthur Ashe, and that he's a thorn in the flesh. And these type of people are spoiling the gentlemanly game of tennis. That was the International Lawn Tennis Federation at the time. So that was the background with Arthur Ashe. And like I said, we were very disappointed that he had come here. And after that, our non-racial body basically didn't have much dealings with him. Right. And what Salim mentioned earlier on the excerpt from the book, that it gave impetus to the fact that the white racist South African Tennis Union at the time was promoting multiracial tennis. Each of the different, the whites, the coloreds, the Indians, the Africans, multiracial meant you play in silos, you play in your own area, in your own separate areas or district. You could come together at special tournaments, nationals only or provincials. And on what basis? At that time, we would be given honorary white status. That's what Basil Ray had come to South Africa in 1969 for. And that was an insult because I didn't want to be an honorary white. You know, why couldn't they be? Maybe we invited them to join our non-racial tennis union, but of course, they wouldn't. So coming back to your question, growing up in that type of environment, it seemed that even on tour, all eyes were on us. You know, we felt like we were always being looked at for various things. That was also having come from a background in South Africa where, you know, we were always made to feel that we're not good enough, you know, and that showed in the early part of the tour, you know. But that was the experiences playing tennis in South Africa at that time amongst our non-racial body. We had great camaraderie. We were very competitive on court, but we were great friends off court, united by a common purpose of non-racial sport, you know. And yeah, that was the background. I was born and bred in Durban. My dad and my uncle coached me. No proper facilities, no sponsors. We had to travel long distances, 50K round trip at least, to be able to practice even once a week. We learned from books, still pictures and magazines, right? And imagine we competed still on the international stage with that limited background. You know? So yeah, that was the background of the time when I started playing tennis.
If I could just
Peter, if I may just add, as I say in the book, you know, that, as you say, Ashe was roundly criticized for coming here. And I don't, you know, I can't and I don't want to impugn motives of wanting to come for the money. But I think Ashe was rather arrogant. And his politics were not necessarily all that progressive and radical either. And you know, it was very reminiscent of what later became constructive engagement under Chester Crocker and Reagan and Thatcher and so on, you know. So I suppose that was, you know, he was working within that framework and before his time in the idea that, you know, he can come and help bring about some kind of change that we as Black South Africans are not able to. So he didn't really, you know, consult. He wasn't responsive. He wasn't understanding the situation. And he showed a lot of arrogance in that situation.
Thank you for that. Something you said earlier, Mr. Bobat, about all eyes were on you. This brings lots of pressure, of course, as an athlete, because competitive sports are about performance under pressure. So there's a whole psychological element that comes into play that, as we know now, with all the sports psychology expertise that has penetrated elite sports, you know, makes sure we understand and appreciate. But were there also eyes from intelligence services on you? I mean, we know that London was infested with South African spies, and often in concert with other Western intelligence services, namely the British and the US services. Do you know, or Professor Badat, do you know if the tourists of 71 were closely followed?
Okay, so if I may come in here first, you know, even before we left, there was tension and anxiety because, frankly, once the team was announced, we had a short period of about 2 months or 3 months. But there was anxiety because we were worried whether, one, our passports won't get revoked, number one. Number two, whether we will even get onto the plane, because our non-racial tennis body, the administrators had remembered, and we all remembered, that some years before, the World Table Tennis Body had invited the South African tennis unit body, the non-racial table tennis body in South Africa, to play at the World Championships. I think it was in Sweden in 1962. What happened was, when the team was announced and the apartheid government came to know about that, their passports were withdrawn. So they weren't able to participate, they weren't able to leave. So we actually were apprehensive and anxious that, firstly, our passport won't be taken away, and whether we would even be able to get onto the plane. So what happened was, even though there was a great buzz and excitement among the non-racial tennis fraternity, it was kept relatively low-key in the press. Of course, it was mainly covered by our black press at that time. Right. So anybody asked us, we said we're going on a holiday. I'm going on a holiday, right, with my tennis racket, but I'm going on a holiday. And we actually managed to stay under the radar and all meet up in Johannesburg at the Johannesburg airport, met up in the lounge, anxiously looking behind us all the time, waiting for a tap on the shoulder to say, step aside or something. Only when the plane took off did we all sigh of relief that we actually now have got away. On the tour, in the second or third week, one of our teammates noticed that his mail was tampered with. And then we took a closer look going forward, and we did find that some of our mail was tampered with, for families receiving the mail back home and what we were receiving. All our mail on tour was directed to the Dunlop Sports Company, who sponsored us for equipment, tennis rackets. So a representative of the Dunlop Sports Company would bring our mail daily to the tournament that we played. Getting a call from back home from our then tennis president of Natal at that time, Mr. Ibrahim Osman, he also told us that some of the members, like Jasmat Diraj, our captain, was very vocal anti-apartheid. His home and family were being visited by the security branch. So we were told to be careful about who we pictures taken with, bringing back material that might, by the apartheid government, that might be construed as being some kind of anti-apartheid. So all our mail was being tampered with. We did have a feeling every now and then. Of course, the white press were very anti-us reporting, would really downplay our matches, only report on our losses, right? And so yes, even on tour, we had that, where we felt that, they were around, the apartheid and the security police. We knew how they had the dirty tricks campaigns all over.
So, Peter, I think that's a fabulous and a fascinating question. You are making me now regret not looking at that aspect. Perhaps those documents have been destroyed, like a lot of us destroyed, but perhaps they're there somewhere in some archives, and we know people who work in those archives who could advise on that, people who are in the TRC and so on. But it would be a really interesting aspect, and like Hussein has just indicated, that given the collusion between the media, even journalists, and white South Africa, let's just put it that way, one shouldn't be surprised if the journalists were not feeding information to the security police. I mean, we know that from the information scandal and many other kinds of things also, that was distinctly possible. But one other thing to bring here is that, of course, as I mentioned in the book, one Craig Williamson, the killer, the murderer of Ruth First, and many other people, ironically is the one who approved Hira's Diraj's scholarship when Hira leaves the country in 1973. Okay. And, that was a big blow to the ANC, that expose of Craig Williamson as a super spy. Okay. So undoubtedly, there would have been some, focus on this tour and on the players in one way or the other, I would think. But to find that evidence would be fascinating.
Well, when the Netflix version of the book comes out, that can be inserted. Or I was thinking this would be a great podcast.
So it also reminds me, what they experienced to an extent reminds you of Cool Runnings and the Jamaican bobsled team at the Winter Olympics.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The laughter and the caricature and so on. No doubt that was happening. And actually there are incidents on tour that bring them out. The same kind of indignities that the Jamaican bobsled team have to experience were experienced by them. By, for example, one John Lloyd, who then marries Chris Evert. The arrogance of him, because they used to play informal football. And he used to come and say, can you guys play, And after he got thrashed the first time, because some of them were pretty good soccer players, he didn't want to play against them anymore. No, we need to mix the teams now, Right? So that arrogance of the Lloyds and so on, born to rule, the colonial mentality, came out on tour also.
Excellent point. Yes, it did not escape me that the tennis players were excellent footballers, most of them. One question for you, and then we can open it up to the audience as well. And this is more aimed at the author, Professor Badat, and that has to do with the structure of the book. It has these two parts. One, let's say, is a sort of linear narrative that tells the institutional story of non-racial tennis and partly also establishment tennis in South Africa, and of course the context in which this is playing out. And it's really fascinating because tennis has gotten very little coverage in the historiography, and obviously it's quite revealing. And then in part two, you have the biographical portraits of six members of the tour. And my question to you, just as an author and as an editor, is why did you choose to present it in this way? What were the advantages, as you saw, of structuring the book in this way? And might a future version, again, video or podcast, or maybe a second edition of the book, play it differently?
Yeah. So, no, again, great question. So, as I have said to other people, this was not meant to be a book. I was, and have returned back to the book on the history of universities in South Africa. The idea of the university in a colonial, segregated, apartheid society, right? And when Hussein's recollections began, that was the trigger for saying, okay, let me write a 900-word article on the 71 tour in 2021, really to highlight. And as I began getting into it, it was becoming fascinating and going into the archives and then reading some. So that's how it happened. One evening I told him, I think this is going to be a magazine article of maybe 2,500, 3,000. That's what really became the book. And, in many cases, this is the fourth book, but I'm still like shell-shocked when something comes out as a book. For me, it's just a miraculous process of how an idea gels into a 300-page book, And there's something almost like organic in that process about how it unfolds and how it's going to get structured. So myself, being a scholar of one of South Africa's foremost Marxist scholars, Harold Walpy, like him, I'm a much more structure-conjuncture person. I'm most comfortable describing the conditions under which struggles take place and so on. Of course, I had to make forays after 1994 into policy issues. So just depicting and describing and analyzing structure, social relations, and conjuncture is not enough. You have to now advance policies for the new South Africa. But it's always something I did tentatively. But in my previous book, The Forgotten People, I do get into a little biographies of the people who were banished under apartheid. And coming out of that book, I had the idea of doing a biography of an incredible Afrikaner woman called Shulamit Mullah, who was part of the Communist Party in the 1930s, 40s. And I thought it would be a wonderful biography. And I gave up on that idea for various reasons. So this was an opportunity to try and get back into the biography in a rather amateur way, to be honest, right? So there was something quite organic about, covering the story and what happened, and then saying to myself, well, I can't leave it there. I mean, I need to speak about each of these people, really do justice to their lives and what this tour meant to them and so on. Of course, one could have written a biography on Jasmine Diraj himself, as a full length. So there was something quite organic in the way it worked out, Let's discuss the structure, conjuncture, the agency of the tennis players on the tour, and then let's get into the biography. And the biography is really, at a kind of certain level, it's about a memory against forgetting, Don't forget these 6 players. And don't forget many others like them who could have reached the pinnacle of tennis or sport and were not given the opportunities and discarded, Some kind of tribute to people like that. And, that might take us nicely into what's happened after the book in terms of the struggle for social justice, and we can get into that. There was already a question and answer about, can you speak about the engagements with the International Tennis Federation and Wimbledon? And hopefully we can come to that.
Terrific. Tarminder, should we start with the audience questions? You think this is a good moment to bridge?
I think so.
Because we're about 45 minutes or so into the conversation.
Yeah.
In football, that's halftime. My mind works in those ways.
Yeah, but injury time now goes up to 15 minutes, Peter.
Yeah, we used to call it Fergie time, but
yeah,
the young ones don't know what that is.
Peter, can I add something, Peter?
Please.
You were talking about the tensions and anxiety. So when the team was announced, that was early in 1971, I had just completed matric and enrolled at University College on Salisbury Island, the Bush College. And when the tour was announced, I was advised to apply for leave, and which I duly did. And in the application for leave, it asked the question, reason for leave. So I stated that selected to represent South Africa in the UK and Europe. And, I was the number one South Africa. So that my application was, the Senate turned down my application. And we even applied a second time. One of the lecturers from America applied on my behalf a second time, motivating that it's an honor. And anywhere in the world, the university would actually assist you and possibly even waive your fees in the future, right? So they turned down my application, and they told me that when I return, I must not come back to campus, and that I must reapply the following year. So I actually lost out an entire year just because of that, where permission was denied. The Senate refused to accept that it's an honor. And I would have only missed a short period, and all the lecturers were willing to help me to catch up. But permission was denied, so I lost an entire year. So, that already, my parents were anxious, but they supported me fully, But yeah, so before the tour even, that was what happened to me in terms of my studies.
So coincidentally, Ghulam Wahid and I are in the process of finalizing an edited collection on the University of Durban-Westville, the history of the University of Durban-Westville. I've just finished the first draft chapter on the period 1961 to 1976. And this account and the psychology of the leadership of the university is helpful as a way of illustrating the point he's making, that anywhere else in the world, a university administration would be proud and would facilitate someone going. So it gives you an insight into the mentality of the administrators, who were all, of course, Broeder Bond, part of the Apartheid Separate Development Project.
Thank you both for sharing those experiences and insights. Yeah, truly shameful conduct. And if you're not from Southern Africa, or you don't know the Southern African story and context, you'd miss that. So thank you for that. There's a question from the audience, from Alon Rab. Says, I'm just going to read it. Thank you for bringing this important story to life. Hussein Bobat, my heart goes out to you and all those whose dreams were and are thwarted by racist and fearful men and women who support systems of oppression. Did the ILTA secretary, Basil Ray, or Alfred Chambers, the head of the white racist tennis body in South Africa at the time, and the All England Lawn Tennis Association chief executive, Sally Bolton, ever apologize to you? Did they ever make amends for their role in aiding a regime of hate? Also, how did your life unfold outside of tennis? And we've gotten a glimpse of that already. And the closing point is for peace and justice in Israel, Palestine, and the end of the apartheid system there. Alon Rab, originally from Jerusalem, but writing from his home in Portland, Oregon, USA.
Oh.
And Peter, there was another question before that as well.
Yeah, I said I would respond online rather than privately because it's about the same issue, what is happening about.
Exactly. I just wanted to
Let me start on that because...
I'm sorry, I missed that first question. My apologies to Jacob Ivy. We will read it after this exchange. Sorry about that.
I mean, it's a similar question in a sense. So there's been a real learning, with the publication of this book. The publication of the last one had a similar dynamic because the forgotten people that I was writing about, the people who were banished, as opposed to detained or banned or imprisoned on Robben Island, are still forgotten in South Africa. And despite my efforts to campaign with the new ANC government, there was very little interest in really honoring those banished people, despite all my efforts. Okay? And that includes efforts with people who are ministers of the new government. So, and that has a material effect on those people, or at least on their families. Because if you don't feature in Volume 7 of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, you are not eligible for reparations. And those reparations can sometimes help your families, even if not you. So despite handing over a list of the 156 people who were banished, nothing was done. All that happened through my efforts was that they would be included in the Wall of Remembrance at Freedom Park in Pretoria. But the substantive issue of reparations was not addressed. Okay? So this is about a future government itself breeding amnesia and refusing to recognize and reparate people who sacrificed. Okay. So now fast forward to this book. And so to date, we have written one letter to the International Tennis Federation, bringing this issue to their attention and suggesting to them that in light of their beautiful statement about commitment to non-racialism and diversity and inclusion on their website, that they might want to investigate this and make the necessary apologies. We've had an exchange of 3 letters now with Sally Bolton and Wimbledon. To date, there's a dragging of feet around this. Initially, we are busy with Wimbledon. Why don't you come and present a seminar paper at our conference that we have on tennis in early November? Fine. So we've engaged with her around this. Her last letter was about 6 weeks ago. So she's due another 4th letter now to say, you've been given enough time now. You've said that your historians are investigating this. Can we have a response from you now without any more prevarication about what the hell is going on? Your historian has never contacted me if he or she needs some information. Right. So they seem to be kicking for touch and refusing to engage it. But you go on to the Wimbledon website and it's beautiful, flowery words about non-racialism, about diversity, about inclusion. I'm afraid the reality is that people in power, the elites, do not like to apologize. They do not like to acknowledge that anything unjust happened. Or if it happened, it was under someone else's watch. So this, it seems, is going to be an uphill battle to get Sally Bolton to do the right thing. Okay. In our last communication, she insisted on speaking directly to Hussein. And we said, sure, here's the telephone number. Contact him by all means. What is it that you want to know? She hasn't done that to date. Okay? She's been pressing for the telephone number from me, imagining that somehow I am simply behind this and, she can deal with Hussein directly. So we have a situation where the ILTF has not responded for 3 months, but saying that they're investigating. Sally Bolton is just messing around as far as I'm concerned. And then worst, a letter was written on the 30th of June to Tennis South Africa, to the president. He hasn't had the courtesy of responding to date. The own Tennis South Africa. It was simply saying, are you aware of this? You should be aware of it because someone bought 3 copies of the book and gave you a copy of that. Right? And no response. All we were saying to them is, can you get behind this? This was an injustice. You need to take it up. Worse, when we had the book launch, Peter, in London, with a Jeremy Corbyn speaking, with a Peter Hain speaking, or would have spoken, but he sent a message of support. The South African High Commissioner didn't bother responding to 3 invitations to come and speak, to come behind this campaign. He didn't even bother to respond to the letter. That tells you the tragedy of the contemporary South Africa, where amnesia is taking over.
Thank you for also bridging to that first question that I had overlooked. A really powerful answer.
Oh, sorry. I mean, as sports historians, you would be interested in my response to Sally Bolton, because she genuflected to say, we have the Sport History Day, you know, in early November. Why don't you come and present something there? I said, sure, I'm happy to come and present. How about we plan a seminar next year where we bring together people to talk about racism and the indignities that people have suffered, including at Wimbledon. For example, Angela Buxton, who was Jewish and was not allowed to become a member of the All England Tennis Club. Can we also address that issue? So we put a proposal to her. Can we have a workshop or seminar? I will invite people, you invite people. Why don't we use this as an opportunity to hopefully draw a line, to investigate these injustices that happened in the past, so that you can use your beautiful mission statement and its commitment to equity, diversity, inclusion, and show the world that you actually see this, that you are apologizing to people who have suffered these indignities. I haven't had a response to that either.
Yeah, I wonder why. Well, hope never dies, Salim. So maybe a response will come in the future. Are there questions from the other panelists or contributors or from the audience? There's a chat going on among the panelists, but there's also an audience out there. While we wait, I guess I could throw another question out there. I've got quite a few, but
Peter, can I?
Yes, please.
So, Tarminda had intimated that, you know, there's the key chapter in the book about what really happened, the Wimbledon incident. And I don't know if Tarminda still wants me to read that, but it's actually the key moment on the tour regarding what happened and the actual incident where my application and acceptance at Junior Wimbledon was withdrawn. So I don't know if you want me to read that part out now or just to chat about that incident.
Yeah, I found that the way you put it, and which connects so nicely with the international collusion part, which Salim read it. And in the end, the last sentence you put it, you connect the dots. The dots were just so easy to connect there. I think you also have a question from our audience about, after all this, how did your life unfold outside tennis? So, I mean, you could read it, but I think
I will answer that.
Yeah,
I would like to answer that, but without reading the whole thing, just the gist of what actually happened. So,
yes.
Because, like I say in the book, there were many terms post the tour that, my application, I wasn't accepted, or my application was withdrawn or terminated, or, you know, like people didn't really know what actually happened. So that's the key. So just a background. On tour, like all the others, I applied to participate in Junior Wimbledon. Like all the other tournaments we played in, we had to send in a form, fill up. There were questions asked. You had to be the #1 junior under 19 in your country. You had to have been the holder of your South African national title and your results. And so I sent in my application to the All England Lawn Tennis Club, which then and now handles all the entries for Wimbledon, including Junior Wimbledon. So a couple of weeks later, on tour, I get a telegram from the All England Club. It's almost 52 years later now, and I can still remember that. Opening the telegram and read, "Congratulations, you have been accepted for Junior Wimbledon 1971. Accepted is the key word. So, I mean, that was like an absolute wow moment for me, because like it was the culmination of all the years of practice and hard work, no sponsors, nothing. Now we dreamt of playing at Wimbledon, and now it's going to be a reality. So coming next now, what you mentioned, there was another telegram, this time from the ILTF, requesting me to a meeting about a week or 10 days before Wimbledon was about to start. I mean, we all were preparing now and loving the moment that I'm going to be participating in Junior Wimbledon, speaking to the other competitors who were accepted. Vijay Amritaraj of India was going to be playing. I remember a couple other names. We even found out that one unknown at that time, Bjorn Borg, was in the same draw as me. Right, okay. So we go to this meeting. I was told to come with my captain, who was Jasmeet Dhiraj. We go to this meeting. I'm a young, green, 18-year-old. All I'm interested in playing tennis. And we go to this meeting. We hadn't known what it was for, but when we entered the office of Basil Ray, this is the same Basil Ray Salim told you earlier, join the dots. Now, a couple of years later, the same Basil Ray has called us to a meeting. When we enter the office, we see somebody else sitting on one side of the office who was vaguely familiar to me, but our captain, Jasmeet, instantly recognized as the head of the white racist body of South Africa at that time. We were shocked that he had flown all the way from South Africa to attend this meeting where I was asked to come. So Jasmeet, who was an amazing person, very strong anti-apartheid, he asked, we refer to Alf Chalmers as Baas Chalmers. It's a derogatory term that us blacks in South Africa use. It actually means master, because any white we had to call him Baas, because that's our supremacist. So we were stunned that he was there. He actually had come all the way from South Africa to object to my entry in Wimbledon. He objected on the very grounds that I was accepted, that I was the #1 South African junior, I was a national champion, all my results up to that, even the tournaments I had played leading up to Wimbledon on the tour. The objection from Basil, from Alf Chalmers, was that I wasn't the official #1. But Jasmeet said, how can you say that when in South Africa, he's not even allowed to play against the #1? How can you say that when we are not even allowed to come into your area to play in the tournaments? It went on back and forth for like about an hour, but it was, we could see, and I'm sitting there, I remember having a sinking feeling that something nasty was about to happen. And then Basil Ray stood up, and I can still recall, with a smirk on his face, cigar or cigarette toting, he stood up and said, tomorrow I will instruct the All England Club to remove your name from the draw. And just like that, stroke of a pen, right? White racist South Africa with the colluding British master, I was out of Wimbledon. So the key thing, I was accepted. Not that I had applied and wasn't turned down. I was in the draw. I was literally what happened in South Africa with our apartheid time. We had forced removals. I was forcibly removed from the draw, not on the basis of my ability, which I satisfied the criteria, but because of the color of my skin. No doubt about that. So just to come back to the question from the audience about the second part, unless you want to just chat about that, but yeah, I came back. I had to reapply to get back to university the next year. Salim mentioned in your book, they didn't even refund me my fees. But what happened was I reapplied. It took me some months to get rejuvenated to play tennis again, because I mean, my dad and my family, you know, were very anxious that like your future, because, you know, as Black South African, you had to move on, you had to study, you know, educate yourself, you know, and get ready. But I did get back in tennis. I won a provincial open in 1972. I got selected for the interprovincial team, which I captained for many years after that. But a couple of years later, an injury to my back curtailed my playing to the extent that for over a year I didn't play. And then I had to make a choice of carrying on with the injury or, you know, my career post university. So yeah, subsequent to that, I coached for our non-racial tennis body. I did free coaching for like 20 years. I introduced hundreds of juniors, Black juniors, to tennis, mentored some of them, took them to national level. One of my girls, she became number 2 in our province, was the top 5 in South Africa. Yeah, so I stayed involved and was part of the admin system.
May I ask a follow-up question from that? I'm curious, when they removed you from draw, what happened? Was somebody else put in the draw? Because usually the organizations are trying to keep the draw full rather than have buys and all those kind of things.
But I mean, you've played tennis, you know that. Absolutely. Sometimes only the number 1 or number 2 seed would have a draw, but that's a different matter. We on this trip that Salim talks about when we went for the book launch in the UK, and on our journey to meet our captain Jasmine Diraj, who I hadn't seen for 52 years, because he had to exile. He couldn't come back because of the pressure and tension. He was warned. And imagine, I mean, he sacrificed his entire life and family because he didn't come back with us. But anyway, on the trip, passing time while Salim was sending emails, I did some research and actually did find that out, you see. Sorry. This guy, Basil Ray, he was the same guy that had come to South Africa. We had shown him the door, literally, you know. And he was, in a way, getting his own back together with the South African body at that time.
But Hussein, did they leave the draw empty?
Okay, so we were doing a bit of research. We came across the junior Wimbledon draw of 1971.
Cool.
There were 4 blanks. So 4 people, I assume mine would have been one of them, right? Others may not, whatever reason, but there were 4 gaps in that same draw, which means that I could easily have played. I mean, it was not that it was full, but like I say, I was accepted already. But we have the draw, and that's where I found out that Bjorn Borg was in the draw. Of course, I knew that Vijay Amrita because we chatted a lot. That hey, we're going to be meeting up during Wimbledon week, and there was a junior champion of Sudan. If I remember his name correctly, his name was Syed Farid Talal, 53 years ago. But yeah, he was also in the draw. So yes, there were 4 blanks in the draw. And ironically, the South African junior number 1, Byron Bertram, didn't even play in junior Wimbledon. We didn't even have an entry in junior Wimbledon that year. I mean, that's the sad part, the irony of it all. And that we had played in all the tournaments leading up to Wimbledon under the auspices of the international body, right? So there was no reason that we hadn't satisfied all the criteria. I mean, we had played, we had titles, doubles titles, mixed titles on the tour under the auspices of the ILTF. And then for them to tell us that we weren't affiliated, that's a joke. It is the same colonial master, Basil Ray, colluding with Alf Chalmers to keep us out. And just touching on that earlier talk by Peter, when South Africa, based on those photo shoots that Salim talked about earlier, when Basil Ray had come to South Africa with a few, we call them stooge blacks, who went for playing in this multinational tournament, South Africa had got readmitted to the world tennis, right? And a couple of years later, they were going to be playing in the final against India in 1974, if I remember correctly. They got all the way to the final with 2 walkovers, 2 countries that refused to play against South Africa. And in the final, they were going to play India. And my own friend, Vijay Amrita, was in the team. And you know what? They took a stance and they withdrew. South Africa got a walkover and won the tournament, right? And so that act of Basil Ray accepting white South Africa back on those few photographs where he mentioned, in his own words, I can quote this verbatim, sufficient progress has been made towards multiracial tennis in South Africa. And that's how South Africa got accepted back into world tennis, early 70s. And that one incident kept us blacks subjugated in tennis right up to 1984. That one act, Basil Ray and his cohorts, right? They were responsible for that.
It's so interesting because my own research main field actually looks more at these sports for development projects, and how casually and how many times in today's date that authors mention that this sport for development work is towards a multi-racial, peaceful South Africa. It's just like they're projecting an image which, like, for years has been South African activists have been trying to kind of end, and that's the discourse that comes out in the development side of things. But the other place where I found that really interesting now recently, the FIFA Legacy Trust, which was recently dissolved, all the allegations on how the money for that FIFA put in towards the development of football and under investigation. What does SAFA do? They put out these colorful brochures showing that all the money has been used in the right way, while all the investigation would show, or the regional local football bodies received nothing, like absolutely nothing. It was meant to go there. So when I read in Salim's book, they put all these brochures to show the world it was done. Today, SAFA South African Football Association does exactly the same thing. They put out the brochures to tell the world they spend the money for development of football, contrary to everything, whatever is visible. It's just so fascinating that how history keeps repeating itself to few individuals' own personal interests sometimes not even as grand as maintaining apartheid policies, right? So, but I want to keep the platform open for audience questions now. Yeah.
While we wait for audience members to write their question or raise their hand, just building on that point, one of the most extraordinary insights in this book is the active role of corporate sponsors in reproducing this inequality and injustice. And so if you look, just like you were talking about development, which is, institutional speak for bribes and stealing and corruption and theft. Can you tell that I'm a little bit cynical? Corporate sponsors now in South Africa, often the big ones, have invested a lot of resources into inventing a history that never happened. I'm talking about, mega businesses, like, I don't know, Sanlam, for instance, or, these kinds of giants of the apartheid political economy. And, they repaint themselves by using the 70s and for example, multinationalism as, the first step in this arduous journey towards non-racialism. And then they run it on television. South African breweries is another example. There are many others. And unfortunately, because history is not read widely, this kind of fictional history then penetrates people's consciousness. And that's what people think actually happened, which is so far from the kind of accurate, truth or truths plural maybe, that we get from books like Professor Badat's.
Peter, if I can add there, following that, present day from post 1994, when the unified tennis body, and fast forward today, the corporate guys, those few that still support tennis, everything is at the national and international level. What they have missed is development in the community areas. Our non-racial tennis under our Southern Africa Lawn Tennis Union was built on community sport. Communities everywhere, Durban, Ishawe, Pietermaritzburg, Uitenhage, little communities all got together and private court or something and built up tennis from there. Fast forward today, the moment unification happened, the whole focus shift to international. As long as we got acceptance into world cricket or world tennis, very quickly they forgot everything at the roots. I mean, some years back, Durban hosted a World Veterans Tournament, I think about 10 years back. So they decided to upgrade some of the tennis courts because they needed a certain number. They upgraded all the courts of the previously white areas only, right? None of the courts that we who were part of the struggle, there were courts at Tills Crescent for coloreds, Jeevan Kara Center for so-called Indians at the time. None of those courts were upgraded. Only the courts of the white. Westridge Park, I forget the names of some of the other clubs because in those days I wasn't even allowed to come anywhere near. But I mean, so very little has changed. And frankly, like our current tennis president, like I'm really irked. This is a guy who was, I think, from from Natal at that time, probably around the time that I played. These same guys, all the past and everything is glorified in the KZN website and things like that. None of us are black champions at that time. Before me, SS Maraj, Parbo Rupnarayan, Ginger Mohammadi, Ismail Asma, all were Natal champions. Nobody is mentioned at all. Like we didn't even play tennis. I mean, so even today, fast forward, this guy is now the president of our Tennis South Africa. He was in Wimbledon at that time when we were having discussion with Sally. What an ideal opportunity for him to have raised the question that, hey, I think you received an email, fill me in. But this guy, maybe I'm wrong, but with our tennis body's money, right, attended a 2 or 3 week whatever at Wimbledon, right? And up to this day, like Salim said, hasn't even the courtesy to acknowledge that, hey, thank you, we'll look into this. So, Peter, White, the corporate guys, the big guys, they still want to play at international level. Community, my area, segregated suburb, Reservoir Hills, where I was, no tennis courts, right? Clear Estate, Isipingo, Phoenix. I mean, thousands of people. I can't even know if they've even got one public court. So, corporate sponsorship got a lot to answer for.
So, as you know, Peter, I do argue that there was a missed opportunity that we should have had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in sport. And even if post the TRC, it didn't really result in social justice in the way it should have, because those who came to power didn't want to rock the boat too much, right? And reconciliation took over as a discourse that trumped, to some extent, substantive social justice. At least that TRC would have built up an incredible archive of materials that we as historians and others could be using today to engage around these kinds of issues. So that was a missed opportunity. But pretty much, it does bring out the role that corporate business played in reproducing apartheid. And corporate business plays exactly the same role today in reproducing a certain kind of South Africa, which is not dealing with the issues of the past. Okay. So, business and state, business and its role in these kinds of areas does need to come under scrutiny, and perhaps hasn't come under enough scrutiny in South Africa especially.
Yeah, I think it was in one of my first round of interviews in the mid-90s where one of the people I was speaking with, who had played in the Federation Professional League of the 1970s in football and soccer, had advocated for a TRC in soccer, which is a really messy sports world for South Africa. But I think maybe truth and reconciliation, and then truth and reparations, because so many athletes from that era, were denied the right to improve their material lives. I've spoken to many of them myself, and I know that there are many, many more folks who were elite performers who hadn't fulfilled their potential yet and were denied that opportunity, denied the opportunity to go overseas, for instance, just like the 1971 team realized when you go and compete at the highest level internationally, there are so many elements of the game, of your game, that have the opportunity to improve, whether it's your tactical decision making, whether it's realizing what your fitness level needs to be at, whether it's the psychological part, learning new tricks, new spins, etc. All of this, people were denied. And I think that one of the great failures of the TRC, and I guess I'm not alone, it's not terribly original, is the fact that the reparations were nominal at best. And so I think for sports, it would be nice to have perhaps a fund financed by those very corporations, perhaps, who profited so handsomely from human misery on a mass scale, to say, here is, a fund to reconstruct elements of community sport, whether it's a facility or a coaching development program or, equipment, etc., and start to take steps into a future that looks different from what we've been discussing.
So post the book, and in speaking to people in other sports, and especially at the SACOS colloquium at the end of July, where I spent those 3 nights with some close friends, one of whom was Amina Kachalia's daughter, and she was an ANC stalwart from the 1950s. And she was involved in cricket. Here's a proposition, which I think is worth exploring. I think that the ANC, the ruling party after 94, with Nelson Mandela as its head, gave sport away to the old regime. That was part of the reconciliation. Sport was actually handed over with a nominal ANC member as the Minister of Sport and Culture and so on. And I think that when you look at some of the literature that Ashwin Desai has been drawing on recently, the introductions to various sports people like Jardine and so on, how Ali Bacher becomes so prominent, right? People that us in the non-racial movement despise for the role they played in destroying the sports boycott, in bribing people to come here. Those people ingratiate themselves with the Mandelas and the leaders of the ANC when they come back. So I think this is a pretty dismal conclusion, unappetizing conclusion that I think we should consider. That sport and non-racial sport and sports transformation was sacrificed in South Africa as part of some rainbow jingoism, nation kind of idea and so on. Not a nice conclusion for those who made the sacrifices, but I think a plausible conclusion. And Mandela has to account for that. I mean, I revere the man, many of us revere him but I think we must distinguish between the Mandela of pre-1990 and the Mandela of post-1990, and start to be a little more critical about some of his actions post-1990, which essentially lead to the triumph of reconciliation, a very hollow reconciliation, because there hasn't been much reconciling from white South Africans in relation to the benefits white South Africans have obtained post-1994.
I wonder if that Mandela rainbow nationalism in sport would have worked as well as it did for the reasons you just explained so brilliantly if the Springboks hadn't won that 1995 World Cup final at Ellis Park against the All Blacks. And, if Bafana Bafana had imploded as they tend to do in recent decades against Tunisia in the final of the 1996 African Nations Cup.
I think something worked beautifully for Mandela around that time. Winning African Nations Cup, World Cup, and so on. It reminds me that when I became the first Black Vice Chancellor in 100 years at the university currently called Rhodes University, for the first time in like decades, that year, Rhodes won the interprovincials, right? So I became very popular.
Is that the Badat magic?
But it was my magic that suddenly Rhodes beats Forte and Nelson Mandela and Walter Sisulu in the Eastern Cape tournaments. Big thing. And it lends the aura to you and things like that. I mean, I saw that. So, you know, that Madiba magic, which made us win the 95, 96, and so on, you know. But I think it came at a real price too, a real price. Because it suggested to white South Africans it was going to be so easy. You know, so easy. You don't really have to make sacrifices. You don't really have to make efforts to reconcile and so on, you know.
Can I add there? Because many people felt, well, if you first that handing of the Springbok blazer at the final around that time was a key moment of actually handing that and appeasing. Because remember, Sandrock was created because the ANC government knew that, and Dennis Brutus and Chris de Broglio felt that the way to hurt South Africa is through sports boycott. You know, you start getting them expelled from all the international sport. It's going to, and it played a major part. There's a key moment that some of the SACOS guys had talked about, was that actual handing of that. There was a symbolic thing about the, as you mentioned, appease or whatever, but that was a symbol where we gave away our sport. And because nothing changed, the heads of all the tennis bodies, subsequently, the head of many of, were still the same guys a week before unification, and months later, the same people were still at the offices running like at Westridge Park. I went with my young 8-year-old charge there to sign her in to play her tournament. Right. This was about 1995 or 6. And I'm standing there waiting to sign with the same lady who wouldn't even look us before 1994. And she didn't even look up at me. We stood there for about a few minutes. When a white lady came in with a kid, suddenly it was, hello, Mrs. So-and-so, hello, Mrs. So. And myself and my charge standing there like we were invisible. Like, I'm telling her, hang on, ma'am. I've been waiting here for a couple of minutes. You haven't even looked up and acknowledged me. And you just say, hello, don't worry about signing in. I'll sign in on your behalf. So to me, nothing much had changed at that time, especially at the grassroots level. Yes, international level, we were back. India, South Africa, in cricket, all that, you know, it was a wrong timing. It shouldn't have happened. Because everybody forgot about, you know, where it starts. It's from the communities.
Takes a lot of hard work, and you get very little recognition for doing that kind of work, Mr. Bobat. I mean, it's we know that community sport, everybody wants to bask in its glow, but how many can actually carry that burden? It is tough. The people who are doing it are amazing individuals, but they are individuals, and they can't do it all. They don't. There's only 24 hours in a day, and nobody has the resources that are necessary to carry the project forward. That's why the institutions have to be driving the train with their corporate partners. Otherwise, transformation is going to be elusive.
Well, as you say, unless you have institutional support, Peter, including the government of your own country, and Tennis South Africa, which is meant to be a representative of South Africans, right? Unless you have that support, it becomes an individual battle of a few people to extract the apology from the International Tennis Federation, from Wimbledon, okay? Undoubtedly, I'm going to have to approach the Guardian and Observer soon to say, can I write a feature piece now of reporting back to your readers what has happened in the last 3 months? And how Wimbledon is prevaricating and messing around. You know, getting the journalists to contact her to say, you know, we've got this piece that Salim wants to write, alleging, you know, that you are doing nothing. which she'll, of course, deny, right? But, I've got all the correspondence, and I've said to her openly, all this correspondence between you and I is public. So you've got nowhere to hide. Mm-hmm. Anyone who reads the correspondence between us can only but conclude about the prevarication here, about the kicking for touch, about a refusal to really engage. But that's how people with authority and power behave. Unless they are obliged and forced to reparate, apologize, recognize, they will not do it. We've been having to think about how do we get the emails, the contact details of a Roger Federer, a Billie Jean King, a Serena Williams, and others, about harnessing them to engage with the Sally Bolton to say, why are you not doing the right thing? Mm-hmm. Are you still looking for the evidence 4 months later? And this is interesting, Peter, because, you write about archives and so on. I can anticipate they're going to say, we can't find anything in the archives. The drawers that Tarminda asking, where are those drawers? The one that had his name there and then the one that doesn't have it. If they say we can't find it, so what? It didn't happen? The Nazis destroyed all the files, so genocide didn't happen? I don't think she's understanding, this woman, Sally Bolton, what's really at stake. And the people who are advising us, old anti-apartheid campaigners, are saying, she's probably got very bad advisors. They should be telling her, don't look for the evidence before you apologize. Apologize. There's enough data in front of you. So if you can't find that archive material, did this not happen?
But Salim, that's this communication with Sally is already creating a new archive, which is so important.
Exactly.
And actually, in a very
this is why I made it clear to her, this is not private correspondence. This is public.
Yeah. But in such a strange way, I'm actually glad that she's not taking note, because that's where the hypocrisy between this ITF's grand plan, development plans, every time there's a word development on ITF's website, or it's black and brown people. And it's so that's all we constantly reduced to today. Every time you see any posters about development and they're spreading the game and doing that, it has to be somebody who looks like me or a few tones darker. It's ridiculous. And these are the kind of conversations which kind of start to show the hypocrisy. But I think we would need another session to have a conversation, because I do very strongly believe that today, the way sport is today, there are just too many tensions. And we as scholars have only been touching the most obvious ones. We need to really work hard to unpack them. While certain things may seem like nothing has changed, I think things have changed quite drastically, but sadly not all towards for the better. So I'm coming in saying this, so enthused about it, but also to say thank you so much. We've taken so much of everybody's time. This has been so exciting. And I really hope we can continue such conversations based on, serious work like yours. And many of us are interested in doing.
I think you might have just given me the headline for the next Guardian article. You are a hypocrite, Sally. If they are bold enough to carry that.
Yes. Yes, I think so. Well, I'll dig out some of their development discourse, if you like, if you want to expose the hypocrisy.
Tarminda, thanks for listening to us, listening to our story.
It's been wonderful.
And Peter, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And any ideas that the colleagues and participants may have about how we prosecute this and get the apology, we'd love to hear. Any of you have contacts in the tennis world among some of these notables who can be persuaded to contact Sally to say, when are you apologizing? That will help.
The interesting thing, Salim knows this, Dharminder and Peter, is that Billie Jean King has a copy of the book.
Oh, wow.
One of our tour members, Kevin Bergman, had given her a copy some months back. I'm wondering last night whether she has even read the book. Because interestingly, her partner, Ilana Kloss, was our South African junior champion a few years later, 74 or so, I think it was. But, I mean, she has the book. And she's actually on some of the Wimbledon committees also. She's quite involved with the Wimbledon, like she is with the US Open.
So we're not really trying to get her email or mobile number to contact her, to ask her if you've read the book, or can we provide you a summary, but can you do the right thing? And speak to Sally about doing the right thing too.
Salim, I think there's value in being patient and letting this thing drag a little bit to build the archive. Apology would end something which then becomes impossible to hold on to, but not apologizing, but engaging the conversation.
We waited 52 years. We can wait longer.
Yeah.
That's going to be hopefully my message to her and to the ILT in the next letter. We've waited 52 years, Sally. We'll still be around when you're not the CEO anymore.
Yeah.
Anyway, as you can see, this is an academic now moving into a different terrain, right? But it's easier for me because I come from a political background, right? But I keep wondering now that if this book had been written by someone who doesn't have that background, how would it have been pursued post-publishing? Because a lot of activist scholars, the efforts end after the book comes out. They assume that's the end. They've done their job at the social justice level. I began to appreciate now that the work was really just beginning, and there's no institutional support. I wish my institution could come behind it as a university and ask, what can we help you with? You know, and so on. So this becomes, as Peter was saying, very lonely work, which you have to do while you're working on your next book and while you're doing everything else.
Well, I think these are the kind of platforms where you can start generating that support, at least in solid. Yeah. Well, you have our solidarity. But I also, I think I shouldn't go on. I can go on, and I'll see you soon. Or hopefully tomorrow, Salim. But we should say bye and thank you to all our attendees and participants who actively engaged and actually gave us 2 hours almost on their Saturday evening. So thank you so much, Hussein. Thank you, Salim. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thanks, team.